then I'll kind of take the sketch and, go into my studio and kind of look at, my hoard of supplies and, see like which colors, which textures, which patterns work well together.
Mickayel Thurin is a Haitian American artist born in 1987 in Newport News, Virginia. She grew up in New York, Virginia, and Michigan, eventually landing in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to attend the Philadelphia Academy of Fine Arts, where she studied painting. Thurin's chief influences have consistently been expressive color, pattern, and texture. The majority of her works tend to be colorful, expressive, abstract portraiture done with mixed media. They often contain embroidery and collage. Her current exhibition, Big Energy, is on display at the Saginaw Art Museum through August 2023. Mika, thank you so much for joining me here on the Temple Arts podcast. We have been thoroughly enjoying the exhibition Big Energy here at the Saginaw Art Museum and are just so grateful for the skills and talents that you have shared through your work. And I look forward to learning a little bit more about the process and the content of the work and the way that this has come about. So I just want to sort of open up initially for those who haven't seen the exhibition or seen your work in person. How would you characterize or describe the works that you're making, just in terms of the materials that you use, because you're using a lot of different materials? Can you describe that a little bit more for listeners?
Absolutely. So I tend to work with a lot of mixed media. I originally started off being very fond of like paint and acrylic paint, but I'm very drawn to like texture changes, and I really like when people view my work I hope that they're wanting to like reach out and touch it. Don't, but I hope that their brain is kind of tickled to do so. It tends to be like really colorful stuff, very vibrant. It tends to utilize a lot of different textures, a lot of different shapes and patterns and materials. I use yarn. I do embroidery, different types of decorative paper, paint, marker, crayon, sometimes just like a lot of recycled materials that I find, and I'll put in there, glitter, also really, you name it, I put it in.
Yeah, the piece that I'm sitting across from does have some of that glitter to it. And when you talk about being multimedia, it's really no joke. From bits of fabric to pieces of carpet.
Mhm.
Is there a way that you sort of curate your materials or gather your materials, or in your studio spaces? Do you have a system for organizing things by texture or color or anything like that?
Yeah. So like with yarn and fabrics, I try to, once a month go through my studio and kind of resort things and reorder them. It changes a bit. I have been diagnosed with ADHD, so I tend to be somebody who needs to visually see my, supplies that I'm pulling from. Otherwise, I kind of forget that they exist. And I'm very influenced, in the moment by things that kind of give me joy or inspire me in that moment. So sometimes I will save, I'll be at like a baby shower or something for a friend, and there'll be some wrapping paper that I'm, very drawn to the pattern that's on there. Or sometimes there'll be old clothes that I can no longer fit into. And I'll, have some sentimental attachment and meaning, that I'll, want to hang on to. And then I'll, notice like, oh, that color or that pattern or something will work really well in a painting or a piece that I'm working on. So I try and draw from different materials that I find or come across in life, because I feel like that adds another layer in my paintings. So when I look at them, there's, additional meanings behind them. Um, and I feel like that's, important to me.
Yeah, and it is interesting to hear you describe sort of your gathering of those materials and where they come from and the way that they translate into your work. And what I hear you describing is something of a synthesis that happens between a concept that you're trying to express and the
Mhm.
materials that you have on hand. Would it be fair to say that you're sort of working on matching the materials with the idea, or does the idea drive the materials that you pick? Is there a relationship there?
Yeah, I think I do both. Sometimes it's more one way and sometimes it's the other. Some works I'll have a very strong visualization already of what I want them to look like before I start a piece. And I'll have, sketches that I, worked on. I'll have a color palette and I'll kind of take the sketch and, go into my studio and kind of look at, my hoard of supplies and see like which colors, which textures, which patterns work well together. And I'll kind of pull some out and kind of just keep it nearby, wherever the support that I'm working on. And sometimes it changes, like as I, progress with a piece, I'll be like, oh, that actually doesn't work as well. And sometimes I'll be like at a stopping point and I'll, leave it because I don't know where to go from there. And I generally work on multiple pieces at a time. And so I'll be working on one thing and, kind of look and be like, oh, I can use this over here. This will actually work better over here. So it's kind of a give and take, very fluid way of working.
Yeah, and one thing that sort of strikes me as I'm looking at your work in this exhibition is that use of color, whatever material that is, but having that in some contexts or in some cases contrast the content itself or what's being expressed,
Yes.
and the emotion and in some ways it feels like it sets up this bit of conflict in myself when I have all these bright and beautiful colors in the piece, but then the piece itself, like the topic or the expression itself, is something more serious. Um, uh, can you comment a little bit on that or the
Absolutely.
use
Yeah.
of the
So,
colors?
so I think there's a couple pieces where I think that's especially true. The I think most obvious one for me is the panic attack, which is for folks who haven't seen it, it's a figure that's in kind of like a fetal position. They have one sock on. Their their face looks kind of traumatized, and the fabric and there's a lot of yarn that's been tufted, so it's kind of got like a carpet effect. There's decorative, like a thick paper that's got like very glittery, reflective surface. There's a lot of like really rich, luxurious type textures and colors in that painting, and I think this is a huge contrast against like the actual subject matter, which is of a person having a panic attack. And even when you start to think about the meaning behind that. And for me, it is a very personal piece because I did it after 2020, I think probably in 2021. And I, at the time, was having and experiencing a lot of panic attacks. I have had a lot of anxiety that I was, trying to sort through. I had a lot of like repressed memories that were coming up at that time that I was trying to reprocess. And, everything was kind of feeling like a little bit much. And so this painting or work is kind of an echo of all of that. And it's very, very, kind of heavy subject matter. And when you're depicting that, I don't want to turn off the viewer. I don't make paintings for the viewer. I make paintings to process my emotions and what I'm going through. But I still end up with this object at the end of the day. And I think for me, I'm drawn to color. I'm drawn to vibrant things, and I think it's kind of good because it makes the work more palpable for more digestible for the people who are looking at it, which is important.
It really does create this unique sort of sense of, I don't know, I don't think conflict is so much the right word
Well,
as
kind of
much
like
as
contrast.
contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think contrast is probably a good word for it.
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel like contrast is, something I think about a lot in work, because it creates interest. Like I feel like people's brains are really good at noticing patterns and discrepancies, and whenever it finds like something unexpected, that makes people look longer. That makes people pay attention. That makes people kind of like wake up and be like, "Oh, wait, what's going on here?"
Mhm.
And so I try and incorporate that in various levels, like in concepts of work, in the different elements of art that I'm utilizing to create interest and to create a piece that kind of stands up on its own.
Yeah, and in an interesting way, it creates this circular effect where you have an emotion that you're working on expressing through your art, and then your art itself creates a particular emotion for the viewer, and there's like this dialogue that ends up circling through in a really unique way. In your portraits, in your work, you're showing this very raw honesty about the emotions that you have and communicating those. Um, do you feel like that ability to communicate for yourself personally is able to translate into helping others process emotions that
Yeah,
they might
I
be?
found that it has. And that's not something that I necessarily intended, but it's not something that I shy away from or that I'm upset about. I think emotions are really important. I think they're a kind of like a guidance system. At least that's how I use mine. And being able to pinpoint, these things bring you joy, these experiences don't. You should try and encourage experiences that are in alignment with your best life and what you want and your passions, because generally you'll have a happier life. And the whole point of life, I'm like, don't you want to have a happier life? Don't you want to have a life that's more aligned with your preferences than not? Um and the beautiful thing I think about emotions, even the negative ones, is they you know kind of are a measuring stick of how of you and your authenticity in life. And um so I try and pay attention to mine. I wasn't originally very good at feeling emotions. I am somebody who definitely used to repress mine, and I think that's why I used to have so many like panic attacks and things of that nature. um I am somebody who, even now, I think I struggle with feeling emotions in the moment, particularly like more negative ones. And I usually have trouble identifying them until later, and even figuring out like what they're associated with. So it's, for me, it's kind of like an of interest to I kind of analyze mine a lot. So, and I've been told a lot when people come and they look at my work, especially when I have shows, that they have, emotional experiences looking at my work. Like they're affected by it. And but it's always kind of in a good way. It's usually something that they were denying within themselves, and they've kind of had this meditative moment that they were able to kind of experience these feelings in a safe way. Or it's comforting for them to know, like, oh, I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only person who feels this way. And I think that's really beautiful, to be able to kind of share with somebody, and to be able to express your humanity, and find commonality with other human beings.
Yeah, and I think your work is interesting that it sort of faces, or it takes the idea of having emotions and looks it straight in the face, so to speak, and you hit it head on. It's not a tangential conversation. It's as though, if you have happiness emotion, you're able to express that. Or if you have emotions associated with anxiety, you express that. And it's
Mhm.
not as though you're circumventing that in your work. It's like you take that emotion and
Yeah,
you make it
and
make
shine
it
a light
front and
on it.
center.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And I again I'll say I don't think emotions are ever really good and bad. I think a lot of people are really afraid of feeling them. But emotions are just kind of energy that you're feeling through your body. And the more familiar you are with them, I think the better off you are. So I think it's healthy.
yeah. I want to take just a little bit of a step in a different direction here, looking at your art and an observation um, that I've made is that you use a lot of words in your art, pretty explicitly.
Mhm.
Can you tell us more about that? Where the words come from, or
Yeah.
is there a particular message that you like to express using those words?
Yeah, so a lot of them are affirmations that I tell myself when I'm feeling down, or if I'm, want to raise my, just like energy um, into something like a little bit, more high vibes. Um, so, you'll often find in there like be love, you're okay, you're all right, you're wonderful. Don't be afraid to be amazing. Don't be afraid to live life wrong. You're in control of your experience. Um, different things of that. And so some of them, there are things that come to me when I do meditation, and I'm kind of just being introspective and kind of roaming around in my mind and seeing what's going on in there. And other things are things I take from books that I'm reading. If it resonates, I'll sometimes write those things in my journal. Some of them I take from my journals. Some of them are things that I think of as I'm making pieces. For me, when I make art, I kind of go into, I don't want to call it a trance, but like I'll kind of get in the zone. And it's nice because it's like I can kind of turn my brain off, but then like, go back between like the thinking and the unthinking mind a little bit, um, which is like a very comforting place for me to be. Um, and there's, I get messages or different thoughts as I'm making things. So some I think in the moment, some of them are things I'll be like, you know what, I want to make this piece about something, or I want this piece to say something. And being an artist, I think that's like something that a lot of artists kind of take for granted, is you have this opportunity to say something with your work. Um, and I think even if I didn't have something to say, I would still make work just because I enjoy doing it. But so I try and incorporate in the titles, or either via text with the pieces, um, this messages that I want to share to other people, or that I want to impress upon myself, um, of love and self-acceptance and peace.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty incredible to see the way that all comes together, and specifically in the use of the face. We have
Mhm.
some portraits at the museum that are from uh, the 18th century, right? And the portraiture has changed considerably over history.
Yeah.
Um, but in a way, there's this thread of still that the face being used as a means of communicating or
Mhm.
expressing something. Can you talk a little bit more about uh, your work as portraiture?
Yes. So I've always been drawn to faces and people, and I guess patterns and colors and stuff like that. But For me, like I've experimenting with doing non-representational work that didn't have like a specific subject other than, the elements of art and making a good composition. I've experimented with doing landscapes, doing still lives, like all that, the traditional stuff. But for me, what I always am drawn to and what I'm always coming back to is the portrait. And I love painting faces and seeing the colors and the different, valleys and all the hues and everything. And I love how expressive, people are. Um, and also like I feel like in real life, when I talk to people and communicate with people, I don't really like to look at people's faces while I'm doing that. I'll even find I get distracted when I do that, because then I start to worry that like I'm not mirroring back the proper expressions, and I'll get distracted and won't be able to have a conversation. So but when I'm painting, I can stare at people and not worry about like social niceties and things like that, and really kind of see how they look. And it's a very intimate thing, I think. So it's just something that I enjoy doing. So I go back to it a lot. Yeah. And it is like a very honest, and you do get a very intimate sense of like the sitter's energy. And then I will add that I tend to do a lot of self portraits. And I promise I'm not vain or anything. I'm always around. So when you're painting somebody else, you schedule it. You have to make sure that you take breaks, that they're comfortable, that that it's good. But painting myself, there's none of that awkwardness. I can fully immerse myself into the painting. I don't have to worry about making it look attractive or any sort of way. I can just focus on the paint and the materials and all that, because I'm just the excuse to kind of paint. I'm not um, in that way important as a sitter. So
Yeah. I'm curious, and this may be a little bit like asking who's your favorite child, but is there is there a particular piece in the exhibition that is has a special place to you, or holds a special place in
yes.
your
So
catalog?
yeah, they're all my babies, but
Right.
I think the one to me that I think is the most successful is probably the screen, which is I it's actually named from like an Edvard Munch painting of the scream, of a person that's kind of like a ghostly figure that's screaming and has their mouth open. And it's the piece that we also chose for like all the marketing for the show and everything. And I just love how it's all these little bits of different pieces that come together to make this bigger image, and that it's so emotive. I thought, I liked how it came about. And I knew pretty early on in creating that piece, like, oh, this is going to be, kind of like a big, an important piece for me, and how I think about my work. I also thought it illustrated pretty well a concept that I try to incorporate in my work of lots of little pieces coming together to create like a image or a reality, because I play with the concept of like different dimensions and different levels of consciousness and different perspectives in my work to kind of illustrate time, space, and reality and things of that nature. And that, this is a two-dimensional thing, but you can actually look at it from, another perspective. There's three-dimensional elements. There's, all these different languages kind of coming together to make this one thing. And that's kind of how I think about life. Like, I feel like as humans, we kind of have our own individual experiences and our own individual energy, but society is kind of another level on top of that. And then we have like our identities as, what we do for a living, what we do in, our families, what do we do for our countries or for, the human race, things of that nature. And then you put time into it, you put space into it, and there's all these different perspectives that you can come out with things. So I think that's what also attracts me to mixed media, is you can kind of get a more varied language. And I like to include as much of that as possible. And I think sometimes I do it more successfully than others, but um, that particular work, I felt like it kind of echoed that sentiment a little bit better.
Yeah, yeah, and it's an interesting piece too. Just what can't be translated via podcast or through a screen even is the scale.
Mhm.
It's a large piece, and it's always interesting for me when we're doing some of the marketing pieces to get the JPEG image or the image through the email, and then see
Mhm.
the piece in person, and that experience of standing in front of it and the emotion that creates and the response. So it's it's a really neat thing to consider the size of the piece itself.
Yeah, I have a couple more shows I have coming up, and that's definitely something that I took away after seeing all my work set up in the Saginaw Art Museum. Was I want to experiment doing these larger size paintings because they kind of have a presence that you don't get with like the smaller, more intimate ones. Um, which for me, I think I was always drawn to doing smaller things because they're more. It's just more I guess easier to kind of wrap your arms around and to like get into, and it's less overwhelming. And so I kind of was more focused on, I had this ability to control everything. Whereas with the larger works, um, it takes a lot more, I feel like, out of you, and you really kind of have to plan them a lot more in advance. So that's something that I think pivoting more towards and kind of experimenting and putting myself a little bit more outside of my comfort zone and looking at doing more of in the future.
Well, large or small, we're grateful to have your pieces here at the Saginaw Art Museum, and certainly appreciate learning more about the story of how they were created and some of the thought process that you've shared with us today.
Mhm.
And look forward to having the exhibition up through the end of August.
Yeah.
And it's a really really special thing to be able to showcase your work.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm honored by the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Temple Arts Podcast. Please consider subscribing to the podcast and making a donation to the arts through SaginawArtMuseum.org or TempleTheater.com. This will allow us to continue to bring enriching program to Saginaw and beyond.